Guys, it's me, Kat. I need to tell you something. I'm a werewolf. I'm glad I could come clean to you.
Okay, well, hello, spooky friends, and welcome back. As everybody knows, I'm a major fan of werewolves. Not so much the vampires, but werewolves are my cup of tea. We see them in many types of TV shows, such as Teen Wolf, or the originals, or Vampire Diaries with Tyler. Well, where do werewolves come from? Well, they're actually older than vampires mythologically, going back to ancient times. Becoming a werewolf stems from a couple of different things. Either you are bitten by a werewolf and turn, either on the next full moon or right away. You're either born into it or it's part of your bloodline. Drinking the rainwater out of a footprint of a werewolf, or simply drinking downstream from a werewolf. Also, honorable mentions go to eating the meat of an animal that has recently been killed by a werewolf, wearing the girdle of wolf skin will turn you into one, and then a magic salve that will turn you into a werewolf. Also, while doing my research, I found a spell, which I will try and let you know. There are multiple origins that explain where the werewolf came from, and most of them are really ancient. And in case you don't know what a werewolf is, it's described as a humanoid person who can transform into a wolf. They have a wolf-like head, fur covering, and I will explain 6 different ways that you might know you're a werewolf. So signs you might be a werewolf are: you like to be nude a lot, like a lot. You have hair everywhere. You act like a dog, like howling at the moon and sniffing other people's butts. Extreme testosterone. The cravings of raw meat, or being excited when you see raw meat. There is a clinical form of lycanthropy. It is referred to as clinical lycanthropy, where patients, they remember a time in which they felt they were an actual animal and acted as such, or have animal memories, and they will behave in a way that is lycanthropic. Growling, being aggressive, maybe they're a little bit more hairy than usual, but there is an ailment, or there is a disorder where you are covered in body hair, but that is not werewolfism, and those people should not have to live with that stigma. The first time we see a werewolf is in Herodotus's account. Herodotus was an ancient Greek historian and philosopher, and according to him, the Nuri were the furthest tribe away from the Scythian, along the river Hypanis. Basically, this is in 512 BC. The Nuri were driven from their original land by snakes, and so they traveled to a new area to live among the Budini. Herodotus accounts that once a year, the Nuri become actual wolves. The people turn into wolves, and this happens for a few days, and then they return to their previous form as a human. He swore that this tale was true. Then enters Gaius Petronius, an orbiter for the Romans. He was also a courtier during the reign of Nero. So Petronius writes this story. It's thought to be maybe satire, but he says in quite layman's terms that he sees something he refers to as veripelius, which literally means a pelt changer. So this person literally is changing their skin into a pelt. A wolf pelt. He tells the story where he is walking with a man who decides to stop alongside of a road at nighttime and takes off his clothes. His clothes then turn into stone, which when kicked will bleed. And then Petronius is frightened when the man turns into a wolf. He runs back home to the village, back to his girlfriend, Melissa, her actual name. And Melissa says, "Oh my God, thank God you're here." Now, I am paraphrasing. Melissa says, "Thank God you're here. A wolf has attacked the village and has loosed more blood than a butcher. But luckily, this wolf was killed by a slave with a spear." So I get that the story is supposed to be satirical, but where did he get this idea of this wolf from? Was it from Herodotus, or was it something that he saw? Lykon of Arcadia. In Greek mythology, Lycaon, or it's actually pronounced Lykon, was the king of Arcadia, who tested Zeus's omnipotence by trying to feed him raw human meat. He was trying to test whether Zeus was really all-knowing, and if he could detect the meat. Well, this pissed Zeus off, for lack of a better term, and Zeus cursed him. He cursed him to live as a wolf, and he killed all of his offspring, although later on one of his daughters was reincarnated. Nisimetis was brought back to life, but I digress. So despite being notorious for his horrific deeds, I mean, this guy was not a great guy, but anyways, he was cursed to live as a wolf, and this was very common history. Werewolves in European folklore are so common. It was so commonplace that it was often believed that men would turn into wolves at nighttime. And so people feared this. They were scared that the corpses that they just buried would be eaten by these creatures, and would often find their livestock ravaged by what they appeared to be werewolves. Some werewolves were able to change their shift at will, while others were influenced by the moonlight. Belief in werewolfism or lycanthropy was so commonplace that it actually had a cult following around it. Even in countries where wolves were not common, people were still changing into other types of creatures such as bears, lions, or werewolves. You actually see this in Nordic mythology with the berserkers, men who could actually become bears by wearing their pelts. It was a Norse tradition that one would don the pelt of an animal, usually a bear, but it could be a wolf, and you would go into like a trance-like state during fighting, and you were super, super powerful, almost unbeatable. The Saxons were scared shitless of these guys. Big, sexy Viking men, so hard to defeat. Anyways, they were thought to also be werewolves, and I live for it. In France, the folklore around the loup-garou, or the werewolf, was extremely prevalent. During the 16th century, they were particularly afflicted by werewolfism. There were many notable convictions and executions therein. The execution of loup-garous was often a public sport, and it led to a lot of influence into French culture regarding movies during the 20th century. You see them in film and in writing more and more until they were commonplace, right alongside the vampire. There are some beliefs that werewolves turn into vampires after death, which is why a lot of bodies are mutilated if they are thought to be a werewolf after death, which is sad. Werewolves were so commonly believed that the ancient Greeks actually created a word, lykos meaning wolf and anthropos meaning man. It's a mental disorder in which a person truly believes that they are part wolf. The widespread of the superstition of lycanthropy changed European culture as we see it today. It actually influenced the transmigration of souls. So people actually changed the way that they buried people in order to stop them from coming back as a werewolf or a vampire. But still. This even affected other countries such as China, India, and all over Africa, the continent, where people thought that after death you could become an animal, specifically in China and India, the tiger. Which is really interesting that it touched all of these regions of culture and was so ancient. It's both a supernatural affliction and a psychiatric disorder, where a person actually will assume the traits of a lycanthrope, of a beast. But it's linked with animal guardianship, or a totem. Witches are often associated with werewolves as well as the fae. There are so many legends of this belief. One really interesting thing that I found while researching this was the Channel Islands. They're a group of English dependency islands in the English Channel off the coast of France. And in the 16th century, many criminals were sent there, and they were referred to as werewolves by the people that sent them there. But this story also goes along with the stories of supernatural guardians that were left on this island to take care or protect the treasure or the spiritual burial mounds that were there. It also plays into the Islamic belief that these creatures were put there to protect these burials as well as the hidden treasures within. I also found examples of real life werewolves. Now these are historical fact, although might be a little bit embellished. But the legendary werewolves of the Ossuary, a kingdom of medieval Ireland, was subject to a number of accounts of lycanthropes, both through the English and the Norse in this area. The werewolves were said to be descendants of the legendary, I'm gonna mispronounce this, Lynach Félix, who gave rise to the line of the Ossuary. The warriors in this legend were that of a wolfy nature. They were vicious and very powerful, supernatural type warriors. Now wolves are extinct in Ireland, mostly because of overhunting. The wolf has continued to be a part of Irish folklore, even though they don't openly exist in Ireland anymore. There's a lot of imagery of wolves, of wolf warriors, and of the strength of the wolf. The Beast of Gévaudan in 18th century France terrorized a whole town. The beast was first spotted by a woman in Langogne in June of that year. Her bulls chased it away, but over the ensuing months, many people claimed to see a large dog-like beast that was coming to attack their livestock. They described it as a large wolf with reddish hair, streaked with black, but its murder spree was nothing short of prolific. They were reported during a more recent study in 1980 that of the 210 attacks that were reported, 113 of them were fatal. In 1765, King Louis XV decreed a hunt for this animal. The entire French state was to slay this beast. Jean-Charles Marc-Antoine was sent to kill the beast with his son. They failed, and then King Louis sent the lieutenant of his hunt, Francois Antoine. Francois went and killed 3 gray wolves and brought those back, but they assumed that this wasn't the right one because it wasn't red. And then a man named Jean Castel shot another wolf, and the hunt was declared over in 1767, only 2 years after it had started. Nowadays, it's thought that the Beast of Gévaudan was like not one wolf, but many individual attacks. Maybe the wolves were hungry, or there was like an overpopulation during that time. There was a wolf killing rampage during that time. They killed many. Wolf attacks and wolf hunts were not uncommon during this time, as 7,600 people lost their lives between 1362 and 1918 in France alone, which is crazy. That's a lot of people being killed by wolves annually. The Wolf of Vonsbach. In 1685, a wolf was terrorizing the town of Neuss in Germany, or it was the Principality of Ansbach at the time, which is now Germany. So the people organized a hunt to go and kill it. The twist in this story, the town's magistrate, a really disliked, awful man. He was super cruel and unpopular. His name was Michael Leicht. He had just recently passed away, and people said that they saw a wolf approaching his door, and they assumed that he had come back to life as a werewolf. So they decided to go and hunt him down and kill him so that he didn't start killing people in the town. But another twist, they killed the wolf, they cut off its head, they cut off its muzzle, which is awful. They dressed it in a man's clothing and they paraded it around the town, and it's actually still in a museum today from what I've read. The Werewolf of Valeriz, his name was Manuel Blanco Ramazada, so it's widely believed that he was the first serial killer in Spain. His case was unusual in quite a few ways. Here's why. So he was born in 1809, and he was raised as a girl until the age of 6. That's not the weird part. At which point the doctors were like, oh, that's actually a boy. I don't really know. So he grew up normal, married, and he worked as a tailor. When his wife died in 1833, he took up work as a traveling salesman, so he went all over Spain and Portugal. He was guiding travelers across from Spain to Portugal. His first known murder was that of Vincent Fernandez, the constable of Leon. He was actually sent to collect the debt from Ramazada and then was found dead in 1844. Rather than face the law, Ramazada fled back to Portugal from Spain. During this time of being a guide, he murdered several people. He didn't exactly live under the radar. He actually would sell their clothing, and some people accused him of selling human soap made out of human fat. A complaint was launched against Ramazada and he was arrested. So in custody, he did confess to 13 murders. However, he claimed that he was suffering from lycanthropy, that when he killed them, he was possessed by a demonic spirit which turned him into an animal. So they said, okay, Mr. Ramazada, display your lycanthropy for us, transform. And he said, oh, I would, but I actually just got cured of that curse like a day ago, so I can't really transform. Sorry about that. He was no longer afflicted, so they just went ahead with a trial. 4 of the 13 murders that he was alleged to have done were actually acquitted because it was found out that an actual wolf had killed those people. He was sentenced for killing all those other people. A doctor did save his life though. He was sentenced to execution, but he got a stay of execution because the doctor said he was crazy. But then while in prison, a year later, he died of stomach cancer in 1863, so. The Werewolf of Bedburg. So this is like one of the most famous cases of lycanthropy of Peter Stump. He was a wealthy farmer accused of being a serial murderer, as well as a cannibal and a werewolf. This was in Rhineland in 1589. So Bedburg was plagued with horrors during this time. The mutilated bodies of cattle were being found in the fields on a daily basis, and then the bodies of some of their townsfolk started showing up in the fields mutilated in the same way. So finally in 1589, people were like, let's go hunt a wolf. I'm sure that there's some kind of wolf killing these people, because wolves do that apparently. So one day during the hunt in 1589, they found this big wolf and they chased it down. But allegedly, once they cornered it, it turned back into a man, Peter Stump. It turned into Peter Stump, naked and shaking. The most damning evidence, and this one kind of creeps me out, is that Peter Stump's left hand was missing, which is weird because the left hand of the wolf had been caught in a trap and cut off. So the fact that Peter's left hand and the wolf's left hand were both missing, or left paw were both missing, they believed that Peter was in fact a wolf and the wolf that was terrorizing the town, which is crazy. Logically speaking, if the man and the wolf were both missing the same appendage, they should be one and the same. So Stump confessed to the murders, but he did so while being tortured on the rack. He said he'd made a pact with the devil when he was 12 years old, and that he'd been given a magic belt that would turn him into a wolf. All in all, he confessed to killing 14 children and 2 pregnant women. And then he said that he ate their flesh and ravaged their bodies. He also confessed to killing his own son and having a sexual relationship with his daughter. He was sentenced to die in like the worst manner. He was sentenced to die on the breaking wheel, which would tear you limb from limb with red hot pincers. So I'm going to spare you from the details, but yes, he did in fact die that way, and they took his head next to a wolf's head, put them on a pole, and displayed them outside of the village for people to see. The part that pisses me off about this story is that his daughter and his mistress were also flayed, strangled, and burned for his crimes. His death was most likely the influence of the War of Cologne, where he was a recent Protestant convert, and the Catholics were looking for blood during this time in order to scare people from doing that. So because he was like considerably wealthy, this was like a really enigmatic death for the Catholics to put on display. It would have served as a strong nope for being a Protestant back then. Dogs are howling every time I'm trying to shoot this. So if you're familiar with one of my previous videos on the Warrens, I talked about the Werewolf of Southend. Unfortunately, the pictures didn't work in that video, so here's some now. It's the story of a man named William Ramsey, or Bill Ramsey. He'd been suffering for periods of time in his youth where he was extremely angry suddenly, or he would go into fits of rage. He ripped a cement pole out of the ground, got in a lot of fights, beat the crap out of some men, threw a man into a car, and was arrested. So he said, I think I'm possessed. His behavior worsened from adolescence to full adulthood. He did end up getting married and having kids, but he had a really terrible time with it.
And when you see the size of this ex-police officer, you'll say to yourself, what scared him so much? Why this one experience? Because he's seen something that very few people ever see. He's seen the transfiguration of a man into a wolf.
A doctor came to sedate him. They gave him 3 times the regular dose of sedation, and he didn't succumb to falling asleep. On July 22nd of 1987, Bill picked up a local prostitute to hang out, but he brought her to Southend Police Station and demanded to be locked up. He couldn't trust himself anymore, and he was going to hurt someone as a werewolf. Bill began to snarl and growl. The pictures are kind of funny to me. He hoisted a 6-foot-tall, 280-pound police officer and threw him across the room. So 6 police officers tried to arrest him and kind of get him into a cell, and he scratched the hell out of all of them. While in the cell, he was like throwing himself around, slamming, screaming, howling, and scratching everything. The fire brigade actually had to be called in to cut Bill out of the cell because he'd broken through the door and got stuck. Crazy. So he was ordered to Runwell Hospital for psychiatric evaluation, and they just simply didn't know what to do. They were unable to detect anything that could explain Bill's behavior. So he got a lot of media coverage, became the Werewolf of Southend, and that got the attention of Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine Warren spent some time with Bill and decided that he was under the influence of demonic possession. So long story short, they actually took him back with them to America, and they got him an exorcism. So witnesses said that Bill began to turn. He growled and contorted, snarling and snapping at the bishop. By the end, he was completely exhausted and covered in sweat and cured. They said that the demonic possession had lifted and he no longer suffered from lycanthropy. Bill was never heard from again. He could still be a werewolf for all we know. So where did the belief come from that silver can kill or hurt werewolves? Well, let's put it this way. All the research that I did, I came up with this. This is the only scientific way I can explain it. Silver tarnishes, right? It's not the actual silver that will kill these werewolves. When the silver tarnishes, it comes into contact with oxygen. After it's exposed, that black crust that builds up, allegedly that element that builds up is sulfur, otherwise known as brimstone. Yeah, that's right, the devil's element. So allegedly you mix silver and sulfur, you get silver sulfate. I'm not a scientist. Please put in the comments if you are. It's not shown to be toxic to animals and is soluble in water. However, in a werewolf, allegedly, it blocks off the blood cells to get oxygen in their veins. It poisons their cells, and that's actually what kills the werewolf. But they have super healing, so I don't really know exactly how that works, but that's allegedly how silver works. So there are other ways that are thought to kill a werewolf, and bear with me, some of these are a little silly. You can wear it out. Not like wear it out, you can like make it tired. You just wait for it to get tired. You know, like that creepy guy in the bar that won't leave you alone. You just wait for him to get tired or lose interest in you. You can impale it with a lance. And I know that sounds silly, but in 1066, the Battle of Stamford, one massive Viking dude, a berserker, was standing on a bridge and he was fighting off all of these Saxons or English, just fighting them off. They couldn't get past. So one guy jumps into a barrel from upstream, he floats downstream, he takes his lance and he shish kebabs the Viking in the no place and the exit only sign, and that stopped him. And so allegedly that's a way to kill one. It's a really old method. By the way, that dude took out 40 Saxons on his own before dying. My people. You can shoot it in the neck with an arrow. Apparently that's where a berserker is most vulnerable. You can wait it out. Maybe it'll lose interest in you. Works with Tinder. You can burn it at the stake. So this is like a really old one. It also works with witches. One real piece of shit. Henry Bouget, or Bouget, witch hunter extraordinaire, who somehow convinced the papacy and royalty to let him take over the witch trials. Between the years 1525 and 1625, 30,000 people were burned at the stake for being a werewolf. That's friggin' ridiculous. This guy had no basis, by the way. He wrote his own book. I'm gonna make a whole thing about him because that guy does not deserve the infamy that he gets. He killed a lot of people vicariously. You can tear its heart out. Now, that sounds really badass, and yes, it does come from a Russian source. They would use it on the Vodolak. Sorry about the pronunciation, but it really gets to the heart of the problem. Decapitation with a spade, which sounds really like... It was really prominent during the 17th and 18th century to remove the head of a person suspected of lycanthropy, and it was done so with a spade at the gravesite, so that's kind of like really killing it there. Wolfsbane, so it's an herb. It's also said to be able to kill lycanthropy. But side note, the cure is worse than the actual disease. Wolfsbane is poisonous, so please don't try this at home. It's also called Acontium, which is the queen of poisons, and it's very deadly. Pouring salt in the wound sounds super difficult. Wouldn't recommend it, but it's a Slavic tradition, so allegedly this heroine, Klondek, once used this against the hag werewolf of Armenia, where she rubbed salt in all of its wounds and it couldn't heal and it died. It takes time and effort, but it's a way. The last one is ignore them, which was a government standard in 1670. Traditionally, you were to ignore the werewolf and it would just go away. Problem solved. So what are your thoughts on werewolves? I know some of those things were silly, but do they exist? Is it possible that some of these stories are true? Is it possible that I might one day become one of these beautiful creatures? I'd love to know your thoughts. Please put them in the comment section down below. Also be sure to like, and if you're not already, please subscribe. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Oh!